Hey guys, this is Alex on the left, Tilman on my right. How are we doing today? We're talking about some movies right now? Having fun?
A little bit. I wasn't. Y'all were talking about it.
Yeah, we're talking about movies.
I was not. I don't know anything about it. Coming from last week's video, which I really felt like had great content, and looking back over it, really good arguments, intense arguments at time, and that's the nature of what we're doing. It invokes emotion and so forth, and a key point that we were just talking about is whether or not we want to make sure that everybody feels validated in what they're saying, right? And the nature of what we've done, you probably heard us quote things or say things like, I don't know about that, this is one of mine, and I'm not sure about that, or I didn't see that, or I didn't hear that. And if I say that, I don't want that to be interpreted as you're lying or you're wrong, because the nature of these discussions is to hash out the differences that come up because of the stuff that we see through media or what we're exposed through, and our personal experiences as it relates not only to race, but to social construct, every other part of our lives. And I don't want you to interpret, or I don't want anybody to interpret that I'm saying you're lying. And I think last week we were both feeling some emotions as we were working through some complex kind of feelings and discussions. And, you said that you felt like, you might have gotten cut off or it didn't get help with, and you were feeling something. That's not coming from me that way. And if it was presented that way, I'm sorry. And but I also know that I was getting frustrated. I couldn't put my finger on what I was frustrated about. And because I didn't have a good answer. And I think a lot of people end up in that. I could tell you were passionate, you felt strongly about what you were talking about, all the different topics, and that's good. But I found that when people are passionate, it's kind of hard to interject a thought that might be counter to that because you feel strongly. It's like I just said, if you want to argue with me about, the structure of America or the America's bad or something like that, I'm going to get pretty passionate.
I do kind of want to argue those things.
I'll get passionate about that,
of course.
Right? And and you had said last week you were getting a little frustrated with it in the moment too. You felt like you got cut off, and we don't want that. I don't want that. And I think this probably is reflective of a lot of conversations that people have, is that you run up to a point where you believe something. Now that belief is maybe based off of something you've heard, you've done research, you kind of have a firm grasp of what you believe. I believe something because I've either done research or it's something I've heard. And at that point, two people are saying, well, no, you're wrong. And we get emotional, and that's where I think conflict originates from, right?
Yeah.
I think what we have is an expectation that we're going to be respectful, that we're entitled to different opinions, right? We can feel one way about it, feel another way about it. And the goal is to promote dialogue, because the belief that we're going to agree about everything is just a fantasy, right? Because that's where's the line, there are parts where I'm going to get up to a line. I'm willing to be moved, and then there are areas where I'm probably not. And you're the same way.
Of course.
Yeah, and what in that process, the important thing for everybody, for Elliot, for you, for me, is that we do it in a respectful way that doesn't dismiss somebody's feelings or emotions, what they believe. Now, we can get into whether it's right or wrong, and I think at that point, then it's about opinion maybe, but we got to try to hash it out because you feel the way you feel, right?
Yes.
And if that feeling translates over into how we interact socially, then we probably should talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I hate getting into my feelings about anything. I always want to say, okay, like, I'm keenly aware when my feelings are taking over. And so I always say, okay, well, let me stop here and pull together my logic and try to deal with these situations. And like I said, with the way things went last week, I knew my feelings were heightened. And I'm saying, well, we're in the middle of a show. I gotta, continue to work through the show and try to deal with this logically. which of course resulted in more feelings.
Made you more.
Got more. But at least at the end of the day, even like we didn't get to talk long after the show, but we did immediately discuss it.
Right.
And of course, we come in today and we talk about it. And I guess that's the thing for me in this is and recognizing how well this can work working with you is because not even that I can, but I do feel comfortable saying, hey, this is where I'm at. This is why I felt this way. And, we gotta and then also let's find a solution.
Right.
And it's so often in these conversations when you're talking to friends or family there is no, hey, I feel this way because of this. And then there's definitely no, let's find a solution. And so knowing that we're able to move forward and to improve in doing this because we have that openness of discussion and we're going to find those solutions and work to find them as a team, including Elliot over there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Adonis.
Adonis. Yes, he liked
I'm
that.
sorry, Adonis.
Okay.
I know how I tower over all of you guys. But, I need you guys to look up to me both metaphorically and physically.
Oh my God.
But
all hail Elliot.
but I'm just glad that we were able to have a conversation and to clear the air about those things. Because I do think that last week was an incredible pod, and when I watched it back, like I said, the energy, the discussions, I felt like I was being free for the most part, and debating and things in the way I most feel comfortable.
Absolutely.
A lot of times I try to hold back to not display too much passion because too much passion can be perceived as anger at times.
Right.
And I don't ever want to come off as angry because, genuinely I'm not angry, about most of these things.
I didn't feel like you were angry. I felt like you were passionate, and I like passion. But I understand. I've experienced the same thing in my life. Is that you can be passionate, intense, and people may not. You never know where people are at, and this happens when you're talking about like family dynamics or people you meet in the community. You're right. How many people walk away from a difficult discussion? They never talk again, and they form opinion about a culture, a race, an individual because of a discussion where they couldn't get to the same page, and they don't come back together and say, you remember one of our earlier precepts was, greater are the binds that tie us together than would ever tear us apart. Yeah. That's the reality, but there might be some areas where those binds get stretched a little bit, right?
There are people that I genuinely consider to be great, good people. I consider them to be great people. And can't even converse with them now because their unwillingness to come back to the table and find a solution, to talk and find a solution so that way we can continue to have a great friendship or kinship or whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? And so, that's why, like I said, I feel like this also opens the door for more people to be able to work on those friendships. A lot of people have lost friends, family members,
colleagues, workers
throughout these last few years just because of political things that like the people who are arguing and going on to lead us, we don't know them. And yet we
stand beside
them so strongly that we will push our neighbor away.
Yeah, you got those kinds of people that you see videos of it occasionally where it's like their kid comes out as LGBT or something like that, and then the parents are just completely like, get out of my house. Yeah. And that is something that I don't think I've ever understood how a parent could behave that way, but those people function and act in our society. They're everywhere, and it's not just for LGBT issues, it's for political issues. I don't really know how you speak to try and change those people, because obviously they view themselves as right,
and I'll say, I do understand those people, even though I'm not one of them. Yeah. I understand that for some people, their image is more important than anything else.
Well, you're talking about a parent of
I'm talking about a parent of somebody in that situation. Yes. And so, if I'm, deacon at the church, if I'm the pastor, especially, if I'm the alpha male amongst a group of golfers or whatever, you know what I mean, at my golf club. Like there's these different roles that we are, you know what I mean, that we have for ourselves that we establish as the image of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we want our children to walk in our image. We do. Now, we'll force them all to, maybe not, but we want them to walk in our image. So the moment your child says something that is the complete opposite of what you want your image to be, you want to disown them. And I think that's what takes place in that situation. You know, I spent this weekend with my daughter doing her graduation. Mm-hmm. And
congratulations.
Thank you. I did, I took pictures with her, and my wife has an image she likes to uphold. Me personally, I don't mind being as silly and ridiculous as possible, especially in celebrating my children.
Shocking.
And so I took pictures with my daughter where I was just like literally like it's like I'm praising and worshiping my daughter. You know? Right. And you get looks. You get people that look at you like, what are you doing? You know? But this is a moment where she stepped beyond my image because I haven't explained, but you know, I didn't graduate high school and didn't come close. And so, you know, I have had to seek my knowledge through other means. And because of the trials and tribulations she's had in her life, I encouraged her to, hey, we can find another way for you to get your education to keep moving forward without having to fight with the social anxiety or the people attacking you and these things. And she stepped beyond my image and went and made it happen regardless of what I offered to her to give her, try to give her an easier path, you know? And so I feel like anytime a parent is dealing with a child, we're constantly trying to make things better and easier for them and things like that. But once you see your child going a route that you don't agree with, that's especially, like I said, that extreme opposite, it's just like, nah, you can go.
I guess it's how you get those, like, I guess you hear those horror stories about where, you know, a parent then sends their kid to a camp. You know, it's like
to be re-educated,
and it's just messed up, like on multiple different levels.
Well, I mean, congratulations on your daughter.
Yeah.
And, absolutely. I don't know that I can. I mean, I think I can, because of experience and the human condition and people that I've worked with. I've seen extremes in all behaviors. You know, I mean, I've had families tell me, you know, the dad, you know, she ain't marrying a black man, or you know, we're not going to have, you know. My son's not gay, or he's not, you know, identifies as female. You know, my one father told me, you know, he's not getting his wanker cut off, and no, that ain't happening. Yeah. You know, well, he's an adult, he can choose to do whatever he wants. You know, I mean, at that point, and he wants me to fix. I love parents bring me their children all the time and say, fix them, and I laugh and say, well, they're not broke, you are. There's something wrong in parenting structure. If we can't accept our children and encourage our children and so forth, then now there's, you know, now that brings into question faith, because there are some people that are pretty rigid in their faith about how it applies to same-sex attractions and other diverse, you know, technically what are called subcultures, I guess. You know, that all of that is a very interesting and difficult thing to help people navigate. I've advocated from the beginning of my career for the place for the LGBT community within the church. And I will continue to do that. I wholeheartedly support that population being a part of what we do as Christians. Where I don't know that I agree, I don't know that I agree with understanding a parent saying, well, because you're gay, you're out. I think those are extremes, and I think that that's not.
No. I definitely think they're extremes. When I say that I understand, I'm saying I understand mentally where that person was at when they did this. I understand where they were at mentally. I'm not saying I relate to or I, think it's okay.
Because to me, the paternal and maternal instinct should take over no matter what you do and who you are. I'm going to support you. I mean, now, if you're a bank robber or a murderer or something like that, probably not going to get behind that. I hope you get help and,
I think
reform.
I think those examples of like a parent taking their kid out are just that upsetting because it's hard to imagine.
They're rare too.
Yeah.
I think
we empathize with
let's
the person,
go back. Let's go back to the point of what we're talking about though, as being, no one in this room is excluded or ostracized or anything for what they feel. You feel what you feel. I feel what I feel. we both are pretty strong personalities, so the expectation that we're not going to run into each other is naive. Now, and Elliot is a good moderator, and you were talking about one interaction between him and you last week. Mm-hmm. After reviewing it, in the moment it felt tense, but I think that it was actually okay because we need Elliot to help us steer back. I think what you were saying is you felt like you were getting cut off to make your point, and you didn't, and that was frustrating. That's cool because he's going to do the same thing to me. Yeah. And now, I want you to know that you have the right to say that even now and say, well, I don't know how we balance that in a group, kind of discussion. We have to be mindful that if we're saying the same thing over and over again and you're saying one thing, I'm saying another, and we're just not getting there, recognize that that's happening, trusting that Elliot can help us kind of navigate that. And, I think the emotions were just high. And that way, because there are days that you can say something to me and I just don't care and I'll laugh. Yeah. You say the same thing to me on another day and we might be in a verbal discussion at that point, right? So I'm recognizing the moment that we're in and how we're handling it, I think is important, but the freedom to say what we want to say and, I like that about what we're doing because how many people do come back to the table, right? Yeah.
Well, and I thought that's what was incredible about it because essentially that whole last podcast ended up being about essentially just freedom of speech.
Yes.
And in the conversation about freedom of speech, I was worried about my freedom of speech. And then also at the same time.
Do you feel like we cut you off or was it just the one point that we couldn't, at some point you're saying, I saw this and I'm saying I didn't see that, I didn't hear that, I don't know about
it was about me respecting you not seeing that to the point to where I'm saying, okay, well, let me sit that to the side. And I just didn't want to sit it to the side.
Right.
And that was the thing is that, that podcast, I guess I felt it went so well because we went into it without any expectation to even converse on that subject, really.
Oh, yeah.
But we brought up Trump's Twitter ban. We didn't think that was going to really go anywhere. And it ended up being the entire podcast.
Right.
So therefore, I was in a complete just natural state of speaking and just going through the conversation like I normally would, which led to me being more emotional. Then also me recognizing moments where we weren't really getting the responses from you, and then thinking like, okay, where is this going to go? How is it going to work? And so, as we were speaking, I was also questioning a lot of things and trying to figure out, what am I doing in this moment? So once I did feel like I was being cut off, after a couple of times, I felt that way. Like I said, speaking so freely, it was just like, no, we're not doing this. No, that's not what I want to do. And not thinking, okay, well, let's get through this moment and we'll have the conversation that we always have behind the door.
Right.
After the podcast.
Over.
Yeah.
Well, I think also, sorry not to interrupt,
ahead,
but I do think it's kind of natural that in a conversation about freedom of speech, that the big concern would be your freedom of speech.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's something that's also reflective of how how culture makes you feel. Do people disengage when they just hear something that they don't like, or does it have something to do with race? Again, do people just disbelieve people based on their race? And I think that's for one, that's not logical, right? But that does happen.
Or not just race. How about if I step out of a Mercedes, is my opinion more highly regarded than if I step out of a Chevy, beat up old Chevy?
Yes. But and that's a matter. For a lot of people, it is.
Yeah.
I remember there's a lyric from a rapper named T.I. and he say buy a Benz, I'll value your opinion then.
Right.
And it's like, man, I know he got Benzes, and I know there's people with Benzes, you know what I mean? But does that mean that in my opinion really doesn't matter because I don't drive a Benz? Because I can afford one?
No. Because money makes you right.
Right. Or smart.
Yeah, it's like, and don't get me wrong, he's one of my favorite rappers. He's from Atlanta, you know what I mean? He's the first rapper I heard from Atlanta that sounds like he's from Atlanta for really.
Right.
And so I love his music. But it was like, nah, you can't, you know what I mean? You can't dismiss people to that point.
No. Well,
and I'm sure you had people that advise someone who don't drop a Benz.
Well, he was making a point that probably gives you a stature or a position that had more to do with money or affluence. But to back to what you said with, because they're black or white. What I was thinking as you were saying, I think that there's a lot of times in discussions, whether within families, colleagues, work environments, social setting, whatever, neighborhoods, whatever's going on, that people do feel like, if we're going to apply freedom of speech, that they don't get their point across, right? And that creates frustration. And I think then it's the individual, how they process that. Are you willing, if it bothered you enough that you didn't get your point across, not you, that person, then are you willing to come back and say, hey, I want to clarify what was going on in that moment and have the discussion? Or do you immediately say, well, that person is a racist because he didn't want to talk to me because I'm black, or that person is a pompous ass because he did get out of a Mercedes and I got out of a Chevy, or that person is blah, 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 blah for whatever reason because I didn't get the freedom to express what I really think and feel. And I think that puts the onus on any time you work with, when you talk with people, that you're open to the discussion. Nobody's ever going to agree on everything. And I do think we kind of pick and choose the places that we're going to fight over. You pick the hill to die over, right? And you're saying you want to come about America, that's one hill I'd probably die over, and racial injustice is a hill that you're going to stand firmly on. Elliot is going to stand firmly on Mortal Kombat as a negative influence on all young people.
No, Django Unchained.
Django Unchained is a horrible exhibition of production quality. And
I haven't seen the new Mortal Kombat. I heard it's really good though.
Well, you referenced it before that it was the origin of all.
But that's not his opinion.
In terms of video game violence, right?
I was just reaching for something, man.
I know, but I just want to be included.
Okay, well, we're exclusive.
Right, yeah. Well, I think they make an interesting point about how people also shouldn't. Well, I think the follow-up thought is that people should be willing to come back, especially after they don't feel like they've represented themselves well.
Or been heard.
Yeah.
Right, because in the end, we want to be heard, validated, and that's the point that I was thinking of too, is the validation of what somebody says. Because I don't agree with you doesn't mean that your point is invalid.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's not the implication, is it? That first, I affirm your willingness to enter into a discussion, anybody. Second, I want to validate what you say and feel. And here's the flip side to that, is that if we're going to talk opinion, then we've got to be prepared. Freedom of speech, like I said, I'll defend to the death your right to say whatever you want, even if I completely disagree with it. But the flip side is that then you have to hear what I got to say too.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that I get to yell or curse or insult or anything, because a lot of people de-evolve into that component because they run out of the ability to talk and express what they feel, except through FUs and let's get it on, and they start attacking skin color or culture or upbringing or whatever. And
instead of the eloquent argument of going, I think that you're unethically applying blah,
or whatever. It doesn't have to be fancy language. Yeah. Just, you don't have to have Tilman, you're a very articulate, intelligent man. I don't, what degrees hang on
for a high school dropout.
Well, I was going to say, it doesn't matter the degrees that hang on the wall, right? I think it's the soul of the person, the willingness to say, this is what I feel, and this is what I think. This is why I feel and think that way. Yeah. And somebody to say, well, this is why I feel and think the way I do. And then, there's always an art of persuasion in that, right? There's a portion of persuasion, because if I feel a way, I want you to feel that way. And if you feel a way, you're trying to draw me closer. No, I think we try to do that through educating. Here's my experience, and here's my experience. And because of that experience, I feel this way. And that's all free dialogue that should happen. That doesn't happen because if we're going to go back to media bias in it, what are we shown in our world today? The assault on our senses of negativity and insightfulness, and there's no common ground. We just mentioned the first debate between Trump and Biden. That is the image of what American social interaction is now, is two people yelling at each other.
Yeah.
No matter who you think was right or wrong or came out on top or whatever, that we have de-evolved or evolved into a circumstance where basically we just throw punches at each other instead of, wait a minute, let me hear what you got to say, and then let me respond to that. And I don't want to talk about the debate.
No, I don't have any thoughts.
I don't want to talk about that.
But I do have thoughts on the government in that. That essentially our government is our finest example of dissent.
Yes.
Of arguing.
When our own Senate has de-evolved into, you got 51 people that feel one way and 49 people that feel another way, and they're yelling, or 50 and 40, whatever it is now. I think it's 51-49, because didn't it take both? Well, so it's 50, 49, and then one independent, and then Kamala would be the Democratic tiebreaker, right, or whatever. They can't agree on anything.
Yeah, they're just slinging crap.
I mean, and I'm not going to put anybody. I'm not going to say a name of anybody, but they just keep doing it, right? Yeah. And when you have such a strong divide, in history, what has protected America for so long is the presence of a large middle class system, whether real or perceived.
Yep.
Okay, because we could get into that, whether wealth is real or perceived. But in history, if you look back over time, the great empires that fell, the British Empire, the Roman Empire, the Greeks, you can go all across all of it. Spain at one time, Portugal was a large influencer. When you have I don't want to say a country because it's more than a country, but if you have a country where you have the haves and the have-nots. You have the British royalty and the serfs, and there's a very little middle ground. Eventually, there's gonna be revolt. What has protected America is that middle ground. That's why I do think that, referencing back to that debate as an example of what's going on, most of America was like, that was a shit show, right? I mean, that just was bad. Not picking sides, that was just bad. What protects America, foundationally, is that we have a middle class where that free expression of opinion and thought and success and everything else goes on. And I can tell by the look in your eye, you might have a different opinion on some of that, but okay, I'm not going racial. It should apply. It should apply in dialogue too, right? Because it's not that I have an opinion and therefore it's right. And it's not that you have an opinion, therefore it's right. There's middle ground. And when we're talking about where's the line, we're trying to find that place where you can feel strongly about whatever. Abortion is a good one. Right to life, or right to free choice, or abortion. That's a tough one. And people have real firm lines, and then there's extremes on that. You got the Unabomber who blows up an abortion clinic, and then you got people who just say, I can't get on board with that. And so having that middle ground, the correlation to societal structure and communication is that we need to recognize that large portion that we agree on, or that we have the common ground or the freedom to discuss, so that we don't create the situation where we're taking the extremes, and that kills relationships. It kills, even now, if we go
kills actual people now.
Right, well, it kills people, and if we go in a larger context, then it separates one culture, one race from another. Because if you're black, you can't like me, you can't talk to me because white people did something somewhere. Or in the opposite, in small country towns and things I've heard in my past, that a black man did something, so therefore all black men are bad. You can't have them around. I shared with a young black kid that came to my grandparents' house, and when I was a friend back in high school, and don't bring him back here. I'm like, wow, what's wrong with it? And it was a perception of something else. And so if we don't recognize that there's more that ties us together, then I think we screw up the whole purpose of the American way, which is we the people. All people, even though I know in its origin it didn't mean that, it means it now, as best it's able, to have freedom of discussion. And,
The have somes will have some discussions. Instead of the have and have nots, we have the have somes.
Some discussion, right. Well, or not. The point there, the correlation socially is not that I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
Right? There has to be, all right, well, help me understand where you're at, and I will try to help you understand where I'm at. You show me why you feel differently. I'll try to help you see why I see the way. And what ends up happening is we narrow it down to one little thing. It was kind of like the whole Colin Kaepernick thing. You know, I don't know him as a human being. He might be the best, most generous human being in the world, but the one issue I got is that he started the whole thing about kneeling during the national anthem, and that's a problem for me that I can't get past. And it's not an impugnment on the message that he was trying to get out. You've enlightened me on that. I mean, it brought light to a circumstance. Maybe negative light, some people would imply. Maybe positive light, some people would imply. But my whole problem with him is he knelt during the national anthem, and that turned into a thing, which to me was an insult. And I know that your answer to that was tell me another time in history where taking a knee was an issue, but it bothered me.
Yeah.
And I'm not ever gonna buy a Nike product again because of that.
Yeah.
Because of the contract they signed with him and they exploited that. I'm not kidding. Intentionally, I'm not doing that, and that's me. That's me. That's not means it's right. That just means.
And I'm glad you're able to acknowledge that, because when we have these conversations and we're trying to get to the middle ground, we're trying to get to that line, the things that we are very passionate about, i.e. Colin Kaepernick kneeling, me thinking, now Trump should be in jail for January 6th. Like, to me, it's like there's no other way for me to view the January 6th. Just I don't get why everybody doesn't see this. It should be plain as day. As in for you, even when you say, well, I gave you a different view of looking at it, and yeah, that makes sense, but I'm still at this point.
Right.
And it's like, how are we going to get past those points? Mm-hmm. Where we may even be able to see that we might be wrong and be able to sit our passion down, or our loyalty down, or just our normal way of thinking, and say, okay, let's step beyond this line. Like, we made it to the line and realized that it might be wrong, but and that's what I want people to be able to do. The problem is that I recognize that even for myself, there are times where I can think in my head, I don't have a good answer for that.
Right.
Mm. But this is how I feel, so I'm just going to keep fighting on this.
Right. And
I have to tell myself that's wrong.
Well, no, I would say you can tell yourself that that's okay. Because, I mean...
If I acknowledge I'm wrong, but if I acknowledge to myself that I'm wrong, but continue to argue,
then
that's wrong.
But that might be wrong.
And that's what I'm saying. That
I thought you were comparing that to...
be able to do that.
I thought you were comparing it to, like, the Kaepernick thing. I mean... Again, I don't know him as a human being, so the way that I feel about him is probably unjust. Yeah. But what his action did, what it created, and then Nike coming along and supporting that image, just, okay, that's a line for Alex that, I'm sorry, I just can't get there. One of my friends say this. But I'm not going to let it be a barrier to discussions about what he brought to light.
Exactly.
Right? Brutality, police brutality, and issues and cultural differences, statistical data on that, and we hash that out really well. I think there are solutions, but people aren't listening.
There's people that they don't want us. And that's the thing that I think about is, like I said, is even in our personal situations, we look to solve things, and when you realize that we can have these conversations and we can try to get them out to as many people as possible and hope that they have these conversations. But at the end of the day, are people actually trying to solve these problems? And sometimes, as we sit here, it becomes a dreadful thought for me. Because if me and you could sit here and have a conversation coming complete opposite ends of the aisle, but then be able to meet right in the middle and find a solution that makes us both happy, that we think will save lives and all that.
Rubber bullets,
but the rest of the world, but for some reason, our leaders just can't do that. And that's crazy.
I think it's interesting how to try and compare the January 6th conflict between where you guys disagree and the Colin Kaepernick is that the scale of those of importance. One of them, okay, you don't support Nike anymore, you don't get new shoes. The other one is our nation's capital was under siege. Yet there's still the same amount of passion behind both arguments. I think that speaks to how
I feel that way about college football NASCAR.
Yeah.
I mean, we all do. Everybody, NBA. I mean, Michael MJ versus LeBron.
Yeah.
I mean, people are passionate.
So of course, when you put people into power, like in our government, they of course then have the same level of
Passion and bias.
Yeah. And so where we can find middle grounds there. They may be there anyway. It's just trying to understand the person that's in the seat. But at the same time, how it can be devolved to be something so stupid as just a blatant bias.
Yeah.
Well, it is. It is all.
Well,
bias.
and that's been admitted several times by several senators and congressmen like that. No, we're just going to hold down the fort over here because this is how we feel.
Yeah.
Or we're just not going to let you get like I remember. I hate when I do that and I can't remember their name.
Sorry.
We'll catch it back.
He's one of the Republican leader.
Gotta be a Republican.
Mitch McConnell?
Mitch McConnell. There we go. The man.
Turtle man.
Mitch McConnell. But I remember when Trump was going to get that first Supreme Court seat.
Yes.
And they were like, well, wait a minute. When Obama was leaving, you were saying that nobody should put a seat in this and the third, so they didn't fill the seat. And he was like, well, that's his loss. Like we're just gonna
the answer was
what I want to be, and we're gonna keep moving.
Yeah, that was with the last. What was her name? The last justice.
Oh, RBJ.
Yeah, right before.
That was before that. No, this is what I'm talking about. Was before that. This was
the one. The big
starts with like 3, I think, right?
Yeah. So in the end of Obama's presidency,
they held back.
They held back
because it was too close to the next presidency.
Yeah, and then you're right. Yeah, and then at the end of Trump's first term.
They flipped it, and it obviously it's really hilarious to look back and see the same senators and congressmen saying the opposite of what they're saying right now.
On both sides.
No, because
I don't know about both sides. I don't know about Mitch McConnell talking about it.
Actually, yes, because basically they both have flipped arguments.
Yes.
Is what you mean? Yeah.
Yes, they both.
Matter of fact, you're absolutely right. But
Democrats.
Okay, that don't even matter.
Mitch McConnell back during that one when when Obama wanted to push him through, it's like, oh, this is too soon. We have to proceed with caution. Yeah. Then when Trump, elections have consequences. We're going to do it. We can do it in 20 days. And I agree.
And to me,
it's so funny to look at.
To me, it was beautiful gamesmanship. And honestly, the way I look at Republican Democrats, I'm like, I want if the Democrats are saying they're more for me or they have policies that's more for people that like me, I would like for their energy and their gamesmanship and their vigor when dealing with these policies to be far more like the Republicans, because we are doing deals, we are making things happen, and y'all can sit over there and y'all can beg or y'all can parlay relationships.
However, about Republican?
No, the Republicans talking to. I'm saying the way they. Like the way the
Democrats make deals and get it done.
Republicans are making deals and getting it done.
Right.
Like if they want something, they want to make it happen. Period. And you have Democrats who
I would argue because they're right.
Well, no, you're gonna say to that, Tilman.
No, I am not cursed on this show. I'm not hard now.
Have you not? No. That makes me look bad because I have a lot.
Oh, but you're a Republican, so it's so right.
I gotta do better with language. Okay.
It's not even really my bag like that.
I'll pray.
But my wife doesn't believe that. Anyway,
I'll pray about it. I'm even wearing it.
Right? Yeah, you're ready.
I feel bad now.
Yeah, we didn't do it today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I did. Maybe.
We're getting there.
You didn't. But anyway, I just think that the Democrats they don't go about things in the same
that was
manner.
one of our topics.
It's like, well, we just hope that you all will agree and work with us. And the Republicans are like, get out of here. We're going to get it done. We're not playing with y'all.
Well, and it goes back to one of my old arguments that, it would bug the crap out of me that the assumption of the Democratic Party is that, your minority populations are going to vote for them and that they go up there and they're advocating for you, but they don't get anything done. They're not, and they don't go back to the community and do what we're doing, like sit down and say, what do you really need? Because if they did, I really think, one of the areas like defund the police, which I'm hoping goes away, the concept, but the African American community, the black communities want more policing, but something like 70% wanted at least what they had or more for safety and whatnot. Now, I know where you might be smiling on that is that, appropriate policing. How about that? Fair and balanced, right?
Yes.
So for safety,
Yeah.
and because in your more impoverished areas, there's more crime, more risk, and so forth. But they're up there in Washington yelling and screaming, "We're going to, defund the police," and blah blah blah. And that was that does not relate down to the voter. And I don't want to. We're doing so good today on not getting political that I don't want to chase that. And I'm sorry for bringing that.
Well,
up.
it's on me. It's not going to happen anyway.
Right.
And that's the thing for me with the way that Democrats tend to act and things.
Right.
Like we're saying a lot of good things,
but not doing anything.
We're not getting them accomplished. And when we don't get them accomplished, we say, well, the Republicans wouldn't help us. They wouldn't give us their votes.
Right.
When the Republicans are running things, they just
go
in there and get it done, and they don't need the Democrats. And when the Democrats don't actually need Republican help, we still don't push the stuff through. They still call it this, we need the bipartisan. That's why in my heart, I believe essentially that all government leaders are Republicans, and there are no Democrats for real. It's just
that's a whole
we're playing good cop, bad cop.
Right.
This is why I was hoping that when the Republican Party was upset that they would break off into different parties, because I think that we need more variety of partyship, where people can start trying to get a majority together. Because that when it's split down the middle like this, Abraham Lincoln, house divided, can't stand. That's I mean, it's probably gonna suck if you're the part of the 1/3 or whatever, or 1/4 or whatever. But
the Libertarian Party has grown in support, but where I think that the third party concept loses traction is how long it would take to get to a level where you compete with one or the other, because any new party is going to draw from the other parties, and you got to think the Democrats, even though they don't like the Republicans, they're not going to let Bernie Sanders, they're not going to let him in.
Yeah.
Well, you notice he didn't even get a cabinet appointment.
No.
Did he?
Yeah.
No.
Which was like, I expected that to happen.
I
could tell by how Biden was already operating throughout his campaign that wasn't going to happen.
Oh, he was already picked.
Like he is what they call him House Democrat. Like he is this is
totally
the old guard.
Yeah.
And it's going to stay that way as much as possible. And so
back to the personal part.
Yeah.
That was me too. I was going to say something about honestly is that because we were speaking about freedom of speech, and the thing that came to my mind is how frustrating it is when you do feel like you're being cut off when we already censor ourselves so much.
Right.
To be in conversation and try to have these conversations, and you already feel like you're censoring yourself, and then to have it be cut off. That's why I feel like a lot of people don't get to the point of trying to go back to the table and solve. It's like, I was already editing myself, and you still got it this way.
Right.
And so now it's like, no, I'm not going to go back and try to talk to them because I'm assume that I can't say certain things. And I believe that we edit ourselves a lot of times based off those assumptions. We assume because of this person we're speaking to, even not knowing them well. But like you said, that person got out of a Benz. So there's a certain way I'm going to talk to that person. And now I'm editing myself to a point of where
elevating, trying to elevate your language or your posture.
But I think more often than not, we try not to offend.
That was what I was going to say.
I think that,
but isn't that a good thing?
No, I think it's a problem. I think that the more honest we are with where we're at and what we're thinking, the better the result can be if you're dealing with people who are willing to also be as honest with their thinking.
If you're dealing with the person, right, but you don't know that.
You don't know that up front, and that's why you have to try to
have a conversation.
And try to see where they're at. And
you use the word censoring your language. I think that you're being civil. There's a decorum when talking with people in public. Or people that you generally meet. You kind of fill it out until you establish a measure of trust, and then you can begin talking about more complex issues. And you learn that your neighbor is, pro-abortion, and you just can't have a discussion about that with them. Now, I think what we're able to do is realize that there are areas that probably are sensitive, and we got to be careful when we get to. But we don't run away from each other. We don't avoid each other. We come back and talk about more. Where some people take it so far as like, well, they're life and we can't talk to them, or they're pro-choice, we can't talk to them, and then it becomes this weird dynamic. But being civil is different than being censored.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be civil.
Right.
Of course, because we are civil in these conversations.
We are.
I'm only speaking to the idea of just saying, well, I am passionate about this, so I'm not even going to broach the conversation.
Well, can I get some insight on that? Because I got a thought that came to mind, and it may be, I don't know. Let's just see where it goes.
Yeah.
All right. When and I work with people daily. I'm a therapist and work with people in a lot of complex, different situations. But there is now. We don't have time, and I don't want to get into a religious discussion, but I keep a Bible on my desk, and everybody who's ever come into my office, no matter what they believed, whether they were atheist, agnostic, of a different religion, Muslim, one Buddhist has come, probably a couple people more aligned with Buddhist theology, but young people who are uncertain, who are, rebelling against religion kind of thing. I've never had anybody tell me that it wasn't good for teaching, though. Most people fundamentally believe that the stuff in the Bible is good. Thou shalt not kill. Probably a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
In most contexts, yeah.
Well, I mean, except war and whatever. But if your neighbor poops in your yard, maybe then you kill the dog. I don't know. But
I think thou shalt not kill applies to people.
People.
I didn't read the full text, to see if it says, just animals or anything like that.
Well, I hope not, because we have to eat.
Oh, right.
Right. So, but anyway, so there's a scripture in there that Paul wrote, and I don't remember book and verse and all that, but it says, I think it's in Corinthians, take each thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Now, that doesn't imply a faith component, but I like take each thought captive. Now, if you expound on that thought, what it's implying is that you are not guilty of your first thought or desire. You could be guilty of what comes after it. And the example I use with men in particular is, okay, now, my office, we're here in Woodstock, Georgia, Town Lake, and a pretty affluent area, really. And there are times where I run over to, Publix to pick up stuff for the office, coffee. Gotta have my coffee, right? And typically in the middle of the day, is when I got a free hour, I'll run over and pick up stuff or get something for lunch. There are ladies and women in this community that spend a lot of time at the gym, taking care of themselves and so forth. And, the trend in clothing that is worn to those places is revealing.
Yeah.
Leaves little to the imagination.
Yeah.
Sometimes, right? Okay, so I'm a man. And, I'm pushing a little cart down the aisle at Publix. Now, I'm also a person who works in this community and works with a lot of people, so I'm always trying to be mindful that I need to behave at least somewhat like an adult. Somewhat like an adult. The people who know me don't expect that.
Yeah, right.
At least they need to get to know me first. But, a woman who's taken really good care of herself and looks good walks by in one of those outfits. Now, I can say, holy crap, that's a hot lady, or that's a good-looking woman. Not out loud, to myself, in my head. All right? And I don't think that I've crossed a barrier into lust or, longing or covetousness or any of those things, because that's a natural thought. That's an attractive woman. Mm-hmm. That's hot. She's hot. Now, I'm walking along. Now, where do I cross the line? I think when I go like that,
when you greed for it, like.
Well, when I turn and look and watch her walk away, now I've crossed a line. Yeah. Because I think at that point you've allowed your mind to follow that thought, and God knows what's ever going on in your head at that moment. But so we're not, and I think that the reason that that's in the scriptures is to help us understand that as human nature, we're going to have thoughts, we're going to have impulse reactions to circumstances. Right? Where if I said all black people are bad, that's going to invoke a reaction from you. And it should. Yeah. One of anger. One of, who's this moron? Whatever. But now, you can have that reaction. That reaction can be genuine. But what comes next is what we control. So, you can't shoot me for saying that. I mean, I guess you could. Well, you could. I mean, it would cross over into a sinful place, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk, what was making me think about that is taking the thought captive. When you were saying you felt like you were measuring your words and so forth, you were guarding your reaction. I don't think that makes you, because you commented on this once before in one of our post talks about you felt like maybe your blackness because you're talking to me and Elliot is white, we're white, and you're trying to have a genuine conversation, and maybe you're not saying everything you would, or you were worried that people might perceive that or something. So you feel like you're being measured. There
will be people who would dismiss me offhand because of
just what you
who
do.
I associate with.
Right. Well, you're measuring your words too, and the way you're talking, because you don't want to be angry or come across angry or frustrated or whatever. I think that there's an appropriateness to that internal filter that is either rooted in, moral or ethical values, care for your fellow individual. I don't want to say something that's going to hurt someone. Now we hit on topics that get deep, but I'm not going to call somebody a dumb SOB because they think that critical race theory is the new greatest thing. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to have a discussion about it or whatever. So we have the ability to take the thought captive. Now, to go further with that thought, it says to the obedience of Christ, meaning, as a Christian who embodies all of the concepts of being Christ-like, how do we apply that in our life? That's a whole different discussion. But the fact that it's in there invokes a really cool concept of, one, that means that we're not guilty of what the thought is. When you're talking to somebody, if you're trying to get them to see your point of view, whatever it is on racial or social issues, and they're just not getting there, i.e. me sometimes, it's not wrong for you to say, this guy is being unreasonable, or to get frustrated with Elliot because he's corrected you. That's not wrong. Yeah. And I think, because that's a natural reaction, it's what comes after that, I think, is where it can cross the line. And only internally do we measure that. Because there's no external barometer where a red light flashes, sin, or wrong, or, cross the line. We have our own internal barometer. So I think it's actually a good thing that when you talk about, I'm watching my words or something, or I think that being appropriate is that thought of taking the thought captive, applying a filter, to use a less, religious or connotational thing.
And to say real quick, I do agree, to a degree though, because at some point your filtering can lead to deceit.
There are sins of omission,
and that's what I'm talking about when I say those things.
Well, so I think, but there's an intention
to edit yourself and to make sure that people are not being offended by your just random spurts of ignorance. But at the same time, you don't want to filter yourself up to a point to where you are deceiving that person, or even worse, deceiving yourself
about what
and not being true to how you feel and what you believe.
Well, no, I agree with that, and I think deceit would come in if there was an intentional omission or an intentional change to what. And I don't think any of us do that in this discussion. Yeah. I don't think that's happened. No, because while we might temper our words because out of respect for each other at times, I don't think that you or I or Elliot, if Elliot's ever given us much at all as far as opinion, have intentionally been deceitful. So I just think it's a good concept to take the thought captive and know that you're doing it, and not that it's a negative thing, because we're being wise. I mean, I'm gonna measure my response, and we're not culpable or guilty or sinful by the first thought. It doesn't mean it's wrong. And Elliot's freaking out over here because he wants to wrap up. So, do you have...
I'm not even doing anything.
You're fidgeting, you're stepping back and forth.
I've been fidgeting since the start.
No, you haven't.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for watching. We're going to wrap this one up. Please don't forget to like the video.
And what if we weren't done?
Well, you're done.
Tillman's not done.
Tilman didn't get to say very much in that last one.
So, sorry, man.
Next
I wasn't trying
to... Yeah, right. We'll catch you back up and you can give your rebuttal. We'll give you 15 minutes to catch back up.
I didn't mean to run over. I thought it was a good concept.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Whatever.